This was never about being a hero. It's about refusing to be their weapon. 100 times I fell into this darkness. 100 times I lost. But this time, I'll rewrite the end. When I crossed into this dark world, I felt as if I had entered a world with no boundaries. The darkness was pounding on me from all sides. I could see only emptiness. It was as if time itself had stopped. Nothing was moving, nothing was living, only silence. I felt that I was lost in a point blank where I could neither return nor escape. It was like I fell into an endless abyss. There was no ground under my feet, no sky above my head, only absolute darkness swallowing everything. My body began to drift into the void, as if I had lost control of time itself. There was a suffocating silence, as if I had crossed into a world where even sound did not exist. And then suddenly I heard it, a voice. But it wasn't an echo inside my mind, it was someone else talking. "Aren't you tired yet?" I turned quickly, although I didn't know my direction. Wherever I looked, I saw only emptiness. And there in the middle of the darkness, I saw a red-colored object coming toward me from afar. And when it got closer, I saw him. He was one of my copies, but it was not just a reflection. It was a strange person with bright red skin. He was close, as if I was in front of a monster that had come out of the depths of my soul. I couldn't determine if it was a nightmare or a part of me. "What does this mean?" I whispered to myself. But I waited for the answer to come out of the mouth of this being who looked like a copy of me. He smiled with an ironic smile. Every word he said stabbed deep into my heart. "Aren't you tired of trying to escape? No matter how you try, you will remain in the same place, spinning in a vicious circle. Tell me what it's like to fail." I felt angry to hear this, but I resisted, trying to control myself. "You are not me," he laughed, and his laugh was full of sarcasm. "Do you really think I'm not you? I'm the version that didn't make the mistake, the version that hasn't weakened, the version that has always been right. In the end, you are just an experiment that failed." His words hurt me, but he also reminded me of things that I had been hiding from myself all the time. "What do you want from me?" I screamed, but I was feeling an inner helplessness. "I want you to choose." He approached me with slow steps, his voice getting sharper with each step. "Either you merge with me so you and I become one stronger copy capable of leading the rest of the copies, or you disappear forever, just as the truth disappeared with you." I said to him without hesitation, "No, I won't." And then he rushed at me with incredible speed and delivered a quick punch to my chest. I felt the air being expelled from my lungs. I pulled out my dagger, but I felt that I no longer had control over my hands. It was like something strange was holding me back. In an instant, he grabbed the blade of the dagger with one hand and gave me a powerful kick that made me lose the weapon and hover in the void, unable to control myself. "You are always weak. That's the truth. You were never strong enough," he said in a tone devoid of any sympathy, as if he was enjoying seeing me getting weaker. But I got up, looked at him sternly. "I will not surrender to you." Laughing again, he said, "Your surrender is all I need, because you don't understand. You'll be running away forever." These words were hurting me more than any blow. I felt that everything I was trying to escape from was following me. We fought in the middle of the void, mutual punches, blows. But with every strike, I felt something strange, like I wasn't hurting someone else, I was hurting a part of me. He looked at me with a strange look and said, "Your version has to work. You have to perform the purpose for which you were made, which is becoming the perfect killer." The perfect killer? That made me remember what the woman with the coat said to me about my wrong choice every time I got to this stage. What if it's not the fight that's needed? What if my success this time is to reject violence and to refuse to be what they want me to be, a killer? I stopped fighting, took a deep breath. "I won't kill you," he froze in place. "What?" For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. He looked at me with surprise on his face and said, "If you don't kill me, I will erase your existence." I answered him, and something in me was sure of what to do. "I'm not going to move from my place. Do whatever you want to me." He started moving in my direction quickly as if he was a rocket. His red color scared me for a moment as I watched him heading towards me, and in his eyes I saw my grave. But then my heart was telling me, "What? I'm not dead yet?" I opened my eyes and looked at him, but there was something strange. His color was no longer red, but had turned green. His gaze changed completely, as if he had turned from the devil who was about to destroy me into something more like a green angel. I felt that something strange was happening. "What's going on here?" I asked him. He smiled at me and said, "You passed the test this time, unusually." Features appeared on my face that I did not understand. Joy at overcoming all this, anger at what happened, wonder at what is happening, and mystery about what will happen. A test? Was this all just a test? Chuckles. "They made you into a killer. Every time I saw you here, you were fighting with one goal, to kill me. And that's what they were waiting for from you." He started to fade, then looked at me as if it was the last look before he merged into the void and said with a smile, "This time you didn't." But before he disappeared, he whispered something that I barely heard. "Well done." He left me alone in the middle of nothing. Then suddenly the place started to collapse, and the void broke in front of me like glass, and then everything came back. I found myself lying on the floor in the place where I was before I crossed the door. The woman with the coat was standing in front of me, her eyes full of amazement. "You did it," she said, in a voice full of surprise. I got up slowly. I felt as if I had been freed from something I was afraid of. I looked behind me at the door I just came out of, and I saw the city, which was previously full of shadows, now becoming clearer. The sky was becoming bright, and the buildings were becoming more defined. And now what? I looked at the horizon, where a strange door began to slowly open, but this time the light behind it was different, brighter than ever. "You'll find out soon," said the woman. I stepped towards the door, feeling a strange mixture of fear and hope, as if I was standing on the edge of a new world. I turned to the woman who was silently watching me. "Are you coming with me?" She shook her head with a sad smile. "I have completed my job here. This is your way." I didn't try to object. I turned to the door again, put my hand on the bright light. Then, with one step, I crossed. When I crossed the door, a wave of warm light swept over me. For a moment, I felt as if I had turned into scattered atoms floating in boundless space, just an endless sea of light. But this was not the most unusual part. Thousands of voices, whispering and screaming, laughing and crying, as if I had entered the heart of a universe of lingering memories. I closed my eyes, trying to take it in, and when I opened them again, I was in a place I had never seen before. I stood on a long street built of white stones reflecting a strange light. The buildings were high-rise, made of pure glass, but they did not reflect my image. They reflected different faces, some I know, some completely strange. I started walking. I felt a strange heaviness in my chest, and the feeling of being watched was increasing. Then, in the middle of all this, I saw a little boy playing soccer alone in the middle of the road, smiling and laughing loudly, so I decided to join him. Anyway, soccer was my favorite game. It's okay to play a little. I approached him, but when I almost saw his eyes, he turned to me quickly. My heart almost jumped out of my chest. I was unable to move. Something seemed wrong. He wasn't breathing like humans. Then suddenly his face changed. The smile faded, replaced by a strange expression, as if something was screaming inside him, but he could not show it. Then, in a low voice, he warned me, "Run!" I didn't understand, but before I could make sense of it, the air around me shook and black cracks appeared in the white sky of the city. And from those cracks, they came out. Tall beings, more like humans but without faces, walked silently like ghosts out of nowhere. Their bodies were covered with black cloaks. Their hands were empty. But I felt that just their approach might be enough to finish me off. I didn't wait. The situation felt like a nightmare. I turned around and ran with all my might while the white city began to change around me. The walls were cracking, the lights dimmed, as if the place was collapsing. But they were faster. I felt a shadow rapidly approaching me, and then I felt a burning pain in my back, as if something invisible had torn my skin. I fell to the ground, the sound of my breath quickening, and when I raised my head, I saw them surrounding me. Is this the end? I stood on my feet with difficulty, feeling warm blood running down my back. I didn't have a weapon. I didn't have a chance to escape. But inside me there was something stronger than fear. Hope. One of the beings stepped toward me, raised his hand, but before he touched me, I heard a strong sound, a cry. Then, in less than a second, I saw a light bursting between us, and something quickly pulled me back. I fell again, but this time it wasn't because of them, it was because of her, the woman. "No time to explain," she said, pulling me by the hand. "We have to get out of here now." "How did you get here?" She didn't turn to me as she continued to run, but her voice was sharp as a sword. "I never left you. I was waiting for the moment you'd need me." "But I broke the loop. I'm supposed to be out of this place." She stopped abruptly, looked at me with cold eyes. "No one really comes out," she said. Then she pointed to the horizon, where a crack like a tear in time appeared in the air. It pulsed like a living being. I looked at her, then at the crack, then at the city, which was beginning to fade around me. "And what's waiting for me behind this thing this time?" She answered in a voice I had never heard from her before, a voice that carried fear she didn't dare show. "What you were looking for. Am I going back to the real world?" She shook her head slowly. "Maybe, but not as you were." Upon entering, I felt a chill creeping into my skin. I turned to her. "Are you coming with me this time?" She didn't answer, just looked at me with eyes full of regret and pity. Then, before I could say anything else, the gap pulled me inside. Inside, I found myself in a small room in a high-rise building lit by a dim yellow lamp. The walls were covered in torn wallpaper, and the wooden floor creaked under my feet. In the center of the room was a round table. On its surface, a file with my name on it. I was shocked. Who put this here, and why? I slowly approached, pulled out a wooden chair, sat down, and opened the file with trembling hands. I turned the page to find a long list of events, dates, places, names. Then I stopped at a handwritten phrase, topic, Adam Collins, experiment number 47, condition, unstable. I began to read quickly, as if I were drowning and clinging to anything before the ocean of memories swallowed me whole. The subject showed self-awareness before the scheduled stage, which led to a malfunction of the time loop. His memory was erased several times, but the response was unexpected. He began to gradually recall the events. It is advisable to reset the experiment or end it permanently. I stopped reading, my hands on my head, trying to understand. Does this mean everything I experienced wasn't real? Is my life just an experiment? I heard a voice behind me. I turned quickly. She was standing at the door, but her face had changed. This time, I saw sadness in her eyes. "I knew you'd get here eventually," she said calmly. "What does this mean?" I raised the file. "What is this experiment? What's going on here?" She sighed, stepped forward, and sat in the chair opposite me. "Adam, you were never an ordinary person." She placed her hands on the table and looked at me seriously. "It all started years ago, before you were even born. A secret organization was developing a technique to control minds and reprogram memories. They were creating soldiers, soulless puppets under total control." I felt sick, but stayed silent. Had they erased everything from my mind? You were one of them, Adam, chosen since childhood. Your memories were implanted, and your real past was erased. No, it's impossible, I whispered. The city, the loop you were stuck in, it was all part of their control. Every time you got close to the truth, they took you back, erased your consciousness, and started again. But why me? Because you were the only one they couldn't control. Pain throbbed in my head, but deep inside, I knew it all made sense. So, why am I here now? Why did they let me reach this place? Because they no longer control the system. You broke the loop. And now, for the first time, you have a choice. What choice? Either regain your true memories and face who you really are, she paused, or live forever in the illusion. And if I get my memories back, you'll discover who's behind all of this. But the truth may be more terrifying than you expect. My anger erupted. If you knew, why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me suffer alone? She looked down, hurt by my words. You had to experience it on your own. It's the only way to become the unique version of yourself, not just another copy. Something on the floor caught my eye. A photo had fallen from the file. I bent down to pick it up, and what I saw crushed my soul. It was a picture of a crying baby, me. But behind me, a woman holding me, stroking my hair lovingly. Her face was once blurry in my memory. Now it was clear. It was you. It was you all this time. Tears filled my eyes. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me suffer? I looked at her. Were you really my mom? She didn't answer, but her face said everything. I thought I was born in hell, but I wasn't. I had a past, a family. I choked with emotion. Who are you? Silence, then softly. You were my son. Time froze. My son? I whispered. She nodded with a broken voice. You were dying, sick, no hope. I wanted to save you. I thought I was giving you another chance, but I destroyed everything instead. I screamed, a chance? They turned me into a weapon. This was your salvation. She lowered her head. I wanted you to live. I didn't know I was killing you another way. I looked at the photo again. So where's Dad? Her face changed. She didn't answer, but the pain in her expression was enough. The air grew heavy. Now, I had to choose. I stood, feeling the weight of it all. How do I get my full memories back? She handed me a small device, like an earpiece. This contains your original data. Everything you were before the manipulation. I hesitated. And if I put it on? You'll know everything, but you can't go back. I took a deep breath, then picked it up. Its energy surged in my veins. I looked at her. She smiled softly. It's time to get back to who you were, son. I put it in my ear and closed my eyes. As soon as the device activated, a storm hit my mind. Memories poured in, thousands of them. I saw myself as a child in a lab, men in white coats. This sample is the best. It surpassed all previous tests. Another memory? I was in a house with her. She held me gently, whispered things I'd never heard before. Then chaos, someone screaming, "You have to run, Adam! They're coming!" A corridor running, voices behind me. "He's getting out of hand. Erase his memory, now. Don't let him go." Then a dark room. I was restrained, faces behind glass. One leaned forward and whispered, "You are not Adam Collins. You were never Adam Collins." I opened my eyes, breath ragged. I was still in the room, but I felt like a stranger in my own skin. I stood with difficulty. My body could barely move. I had lived 1,000 lives in a moment, but something was missing. Something had been hidden from me, cut from my memories. Then I heard footsteps, real footsteps. We hid behind the closet. My heart pounded. The door opened slowly. A man entered, tall, strange mustache, cold eyes. He stood there staring at me. Then, with a calm but commanding voice, he said, "It's time to finish this game. Number 47. I've heard this number a lot in my memories. 47. I was an experiment. I was just a number. The man with the mustache walked slowly towards our hiding place, as if he was testing my reaction. "Run away and leave it to me," the woman said, and my response was negative. "No, you won't get away from me this time. I'll stay by your side." Then I asked the guy, "Who are you?" I asked, but my voice came out weak. "I'm the guy assigned to watch you from the very beginning." I took a step back, but the back of my foot hit the wall. Then the man showed up in front of me. "Why me?" "What do you want from me?" He took out of his pocket a small device. It looked like a button. The woman tried to strike, but with his other hand, he pulled out something like a taser, and he hit her in the neck, which made her lose balance and fall unconscious. He looked at me and pressed the button, and suddenly, I felt a terrible pain in my head. I screamed and fell to the ground, my fingers holding my head firmly. The images in my mind began to change. Other memories faded, as if something was being reset. "You should go with me now." I got up with difficulty, looked at him with confused eyes, but my brain began to realize something important. If I go with him, I'll never come back. I didn't think, just acted. I jumped towards the table, grabbed the file, and threw it in his face. I took advantage of the moment when he raised his hand, and I rushed towards the door. I knew that I was his target and not the woman. I was trying to get his attention and make him follow me to a place away from her. I went out into the corridor of the building we were in. I heard his voice calling my name, or the number they were calling me by. But I didn't stop. I ran through the corridors. Lights were flashing around me. Alarms sounded in the place. When I got to the end of the corridor, there was no wall, just a big hole, as if a wall had fallen to the streets. When I got to the end of the corridor at the falling wall, I saw the city, a city I've never seen before. It was full of chaos. Fires were devouring buildings, cars were wrecked, people were running as if scared of something, but I didn't have time to understand, because I heard his voice behind me again. "You won't escape that easily." I turned around and my eyes met his. "You were probably the strongest of all the experiments, number 47, but don't forget something." He took a step forward and his eyes seemed to pierce me. "We made you out of nowhere, and we can erase you easily." I saw his hand reach out towards me, and the small device in his hand glowed, ready to take me back to the beginning again. "Choose quickly," he said in a cold voice. "Either you live under our control, or you die as a shadow without memory." The man approached me, his steps slow but deadly, and his gaze pierced me like knives. Behind me, hell was raging in the city, and in front of me was a monster. I was between two fires. He whispered in a cold voice, "It's over. There's no escape." But suddenly, a punch came from behind, strong and sudden, making his body bounce like a doll smashed by the fist of fate. It was the woman. I screamed, "Beware!" I joined the fight, no time to hesitate. Kicks, punches, blows, screams, everything blended into a crazy, merciless scene. He was strong, too tough to be easily defeated, but anger gave us strength we didn't know we had. 10 minutes passed like an eternity. We were collapsing, but he was bleeding. And suddenly, he took a gun out of his pocket, pointed it at me. I was helpless. Time froze. Then I heard a scream, "No!" And I saw a body rushing in front of me. Mom. She stood between me and him, stretched out her hand to stop her, but it was too late. 2 shots. Her body shook and then fell. I screamed so hard, "Mom! Mom!" I ran towards her, hugged her, and her blood stained my hands. She said in a broken voice, barely audible, "I knew that this would happen, but I chose to see you live. Forgive me, son." I grabbed her hand, whispered to her, "Don't leave me, not now." But she smiled a calm smile. "Now, the decision is yours." And the next moment, the man started to stagger. She had stuck a small knife in his neck as she collapsed. He fell to the ground, moaning, cursing, but nothing was over yet. The flames had started to reach the top floor, the smoke was choking the air, and the explosion was inevitably coming. I looked at the city, at the approaching death. I have to finish all of that for her. Then I looked up at the sky. I ran towards the edge of the building. The distance between me and the earth was crazy, but death behind me was too slow to wait. For her and for me. I called her, promised to avenge her, and I fell into chaos, clinging to hope. I felt the air tearing at my face as I fell from the high-rise building, my eyes wide open, my head spinning between the red sky and the smoke rising from the streets. I had no time to be afraid, there was no time to think, only gravity pulling me towards the end. And in a moment of luck, I saw a huge advertising blimp waving in front of me. I tightened my muscles, adjusted my body in the air, trying to change my trajectory. I hit the thick fabric, which absorbed part of the shock, but I didn't stop. I slipped quickly, tore the fabric with my weight, and then fell onto a parked car with such force that I made its windshield shatter under my body. I felt a burning pain in my ribs, but I was alive. That's all that matters. I slowly raised my head, my breath caught, and I saw the sky above me, that high-rise building where I was a few moments ago. Goodbye, Mom. I will miss you. Coming out alive wasn't a victory. It was just the start of a new game. I tried to get up, but the pain in my body was holding me back. I felt the blood on my skin, and I heard the sounds of chaos around me, the sounds of screams, explosions, and the roar of police cars roaming the streets. What's going on here? I pulled myself away from the wrecked car, trying to grasp the place. I was in the middle of a main road, but it wasn't normal. Shops were destroyed, windows were broken, and there was smoke coming from one of the nearby buildings. The city was under siege. But who was attacking it? The police? The rebels? Or something else? I walked lumbering through the alleys, trying to avoid floodlights and armored cars roaming the streets. I needed shelter, someone who could tell me what was happening here, but I was not alone. I stopped at a narrow alley, leaned against the wall, trying to calm my breath. Then I heard a voice. Number 47, don't move. I felt my body freeze in place, but I was not ready to give up easily. I turned around quickly, raised my fist, ready to fight. But the person I saw in front of me was not from the police, nor from the laboratory. He was a middle-aged man in torn clothes. His eyes were sunken, as if he hadn't slept for days, and his hand held a primitive weapon resembling an electric baton. "You're one of them, aren't you?" he said in a low voice. I took a step back, and I said cautiously, "I don't know who you mean." He smiled sarcastically. "Of course you don't know. They made you like that." I didn't understand what he meant, but before I could ask any more questions, I heard a distant scream, and then a huge explosion rattled the ground under my feet. The man did not move, but said seriously, "If you want to live, follow me." The man led me through narrow alleys, avoiding the main streets where soldiers were patrolling the place. We were walking silently, but my mind was screaming unanswered questions. After a few minutes of walking, we came to an old metal door in a dilapidated wall. He opened it cautiously and signaled me to enter. I went down through a narrow staircase to find myself in an underground tunnel lit by dim lamps. There were other people, men and women, some injured, some with improvised weapons. "What is this place?" I asked. The man looked at me and then calmly said, "This is the only place where the organization has not yet reached." "Which organization?" The man sat down in front of me, then took out of his pocket an old photo and showed it to me. "Look well, because this is the truth that they tried to erase from you." I looked at the picture and I saw myself, but I was not alone. I was standing next to a group of people, all in uniform, and in front of us there was a tall, cold-eyed man, as if he was controlling us then. But the shock was not seeing me like that. The shock was in the sentence written behind the photo, Project 47, Soldiers Who Do Not Die. I began to feel that the world around me was fading. The images in my head became clearer, and memories I had not previously understood began to come together like pieces of a lost puzzle. I was a soldier. No, I was not an ordinary soldier. I was part of a secret project, an experiment aimed at creating unstoppable soldiers. But something happened. Something made them erase my memory, throw me into this hell. "Why were you looking for me?" I asked the man in a broken voice. He calmly replied to me, "Because you are the last one of us left." I needed answers. I needed to know who I really was. But there was no time, because the city was on fire, the soldiers were approaching, and the game was almost over. I took a deep breath, felt something strange growing inside me. I wasn't scared anymore, because I was about to get back what I had lost, and I was ready to fight for it. The city was burning. The sound of sirens filled the air, and the lights of military vehicles cast dancing shadows on the crumbling walls. The smell of gunpowder and smoke mingled with the light rain that began to fall on the muddy streets. In the Resistance's hideout, there was no time for words. Everyone moved like ghosts in the dark, preparing weapons, laying out plans, and getting ready for the storm that was about to come. I sat at a wooden table, staring at the old photo the mysterious man had given me. I could no longer deny the truth. I was one of those soldiers they had created, those whose memories had been erased, who were used as puppets in a war they didn't even know the reasons for. But why was I the only one who went out of control? Where were the others? I put the photo aside and looked at the man who had saved me, the one who had told me everything. His name was Ryan, and he too was a victim of the project. But he wasn't like me. He wasn't one of them. He was one of the scientists who created the immortal soldiers before they realized they were just tools in the hands of the organization. He spoke softly. "We have a plan." I looked at him, waiting for him to continue. "We'll attack them before they attack us." We had no other choice. If we waited, the forces sent by the organization would crush us. If we attacked, perhaps we'd have a chance, albeit a slim one, to survive. Then came 0 hour. We left the hideout under the cover of darkness. We moved through the back alleys hidden among the ruins, avoiding the patrols that roamed the city like hunting dogs searching for prey. I held a weapon I had taken from the Resistance, but it was not enough to make me feel safe. Because I knew the truth. I knew our enemies weren't ordinary soldiers. I knew they, like me, weren't fully human, and they wouldn't stop until they ended my existence. We reached the edge of the city, where there stood a massive building, its windows darkened, its walls cold and gray. The lab. The place where I was born. The place where my memories were erased. The place where I was transformed into this thing I still didn't understand. But there was no time to think. One of the Resistance members signaled for us to stop. In the distance, I saw groups of soldiers moving near the entrance, heavily armed, their eyes gleaming in the dark like wolves stalking their prey. Ryan whispered to me, "We have 1 minute before the cameras spot us." I knew getting inside wouldn't be easy, but it wasn't impossible. I looked at the team and said, "Follow me." Then I moved toward hell. Sneaking into the building wasn't what I expected. As soon as we passed the guards at the entrance, we started moving through the narrow corridors, avoiding the cameras, following the map that was etched into my mind. But something was wrong. The building was silent, quieter than it should have been. No machine noises, no footsteps, no guards filling the hallways like I had expected. It was as if they were waiting for us. Suddenly, a loudspeaker blared across the facility, and bright lights focused on us. "Welcome back, number 47. I froze in place, a chill running down my spine. That voice belonged to the assistant commander I had seen in the photo, the man who had helped manage this hell. "We knew you would return." Before I could respond, doors opened around us and dozens of soldiers rushed in, their cold eyes and weapons aimed at us. Ryan shouted, "It's a trap!" But it was too late. I woke up in a white room, lit by an irritatingly bright light. The walls were transparent, as if made from unbreakable glass. I tried to move, but I was strapped to a metal chair, electric cuffs binding my wrists, preventing me from even raising my hands. On the other side of the glass wall stood him, the man with the voice, the man who had been hunting me all this time. He smiled at me, but the smile was devoid of warmth. You can't escape your past. I felt my anger rising within me. Who are you and why did you do this? He approached the glass, his cold eyes staring back at mine. I made you. You made me? What does that mean? The man smiled again, then pressed a button on his device. A video appeared on the screen in front of me. It was black and white, showing a group of scientists in a lab surrounding a metallic table. On the table, there I was. But I wasn't like I was now. I was younger, a child. The man looked at me and said in a quiet voice, "You're not a normal human, number 47. You never were. You're an experiment." Something inside me shattered. My whole life had been an experiment. My memories, my fears, my dreams, none of them were real. I was just an experiment, just a project, just a number on a long list of names that had been erased. And then rage took over me. All that came to mind was the pill Ryan had given me when I was in the hideout. He had told me he had miraculously stolen one from the lab before leaving. It was a pill used by the organization's scientists to supply soldiers with infinite energy, making them invincible, and I had taken it. I started to feel a heat rising inside me, my heart racing, as if something was awakening within. The man noticed and took a step back. Impossible. How did that happen? But something had changed. I felt the electricity binding me fade away. The iron shackles that had held me began to bend, and the cuffs that had kept me restrained shattered with a loud crack. I looked at the man who had created me, the one who thought he owned my life, and I said quietly, "I am no longer a number. My name is Adam." Then I broke the glass. The glass shattered into tiny shards, sparkling under the bright light like stars falling from the sky. The air filled with dust and sparks, and the alarm blared like the warning bell of the apocalypse. I stood there, my hands pulsing with an energy I had never felt before, my eyes blazing with fury. The man who claimed to have made me stepped back, fear creeping into his features for the first time. This isn't possible. I was no longer just a number. I was no longer a puppet in their hands. I was something different, something they had never expected. In one step, I broke through the glass barrier completely. The shards of glass didn't even touch me, as if they were afraid to get close. The man tried to press the emergency button, but I was faster than him. With one blow, I knocked him to the ground, grabbing him by the collar of his white coat and lifting him off the floor. I looked into his eyes directly, those cold eyes that had never felt regret. "Answer me now. Why did you create me?" His voice trembled as he answered, "We were trying to create an invincible army." I threw him aside, not with lethal force, but as a warning. He slammed against the wall with a soft grunt, then crawled away from me like I was a monster from his nightmare. "How?" He took a deep breath and said in a trembling voice, "We were trying to create the perfect soldier, a soldier who couldn't be defeated, who wouldn't break, who wouldn't die." I knew this part, but what he said next changed everything. But the experiment failed, except for one case. Who? He looked at me with fearful eyes, then whispered, "You, Adam. You were the only one who succeeded in gaining independence and survived." At first, I couldn't process his words. All those who came before me, all those who rebelled, even the members of the resistance who joined us here. Was I the only one who survived? Had they been killed? Rage surged within me, but there was something else, something more terrifying. Why me? The answer was simple, but it was harsher than anything else. Because you were different from the start. He looked at the screen beside him, pressed a button, and another video appeared. This time, it wasn't the lab. There were no scientists around a table. It was a room, cold, filled with children, and I was one of them. There were about 10 children in the room, all wearing white clothes, all sitting silently, their eyes empty of any expression. But one of them was different. A small child, no older than 10, was standing in the corner, his eyes filled with fear and confusion. He looked different from the rest. He looked normal. Then I realized the truth. That child was me. What does this mean? The man smiled faintly, then said, "You weren't made from nothing, Adam. You were already here." Everything began to make sense now, but it was more chaotic than ever. "What do you mean I was already here?" The man sighed, then stood with difficulty, wiping the blood from the corner of his mouth. All the children in this room, they were failed experiments. They were all born in the lab. They were all incomplete copies. Then he pointed at me and said, "Except for you." I felt nauseous, as if my body refused to believe anything he was saying. "You weren't an experiment at first, Adam. You were a normal human. But they took you, made you part of the project, and erased everything you knew." I felt my blood boiling. There was no more time for words. The danger was still around us, and the soldiers could be on their way here already. But there was one thing I knew for sure. I would no longer be a part of their game. I looked at the man, then said firmly, "I'll end this my way." He took a step back, as if afraid of what I might do. "Adam, don't do something you'll regret." I smiled bitterly. "I've already regretted everything." Then I ended his life. I turned and headed toward the door. I knew I'd face them soon. I knew the war wasn't over yet. But I wasn't afraid anymore, because I wasn't looking for my identity. I wasn't looking for a lost past. I was creating my future, breaking the chains. I stepped out of the lab, and the rain poured down heavily, as if the sky itself was crying. The streets were dark, lit by flickering neon lights, casting long shadows across the wet sidewalks. I breathed deeply, each step carrying the weight of the lost years. I knew they wouldn't let me leave easily, that I had now become the most dangerous man in their eyes. But I was no longer the man they controlled. I was no longer the number in their files. I was something new, something they hadn't expected. Then, just as I expected, I heard the voice. "Stop where you are." I slowly raised my head, my eyes meeting the person waiting for me. He was tall, his hat covering part of his face. But I didn't need to see his eyes to know who he was. "I knew you would come out eventually, Adam." His voice was calm, but it held something dark within it, something I had seen before. "Have you been waiting for me long, Jack?" He smiled faintly, then said, "I've always been behind you, but you weren't ready yet." I didn't move, just stared at him. I knew this confrontation wasn't just a fight. It was the beginning of a war. We stood there under the rain, with nothing but the silence of the night and the lightning illuminating our faces for brief moments. Jack was more than just a person wanted to fight me. He was my shadow. He was one of the resistance members. But it seemed like they could control him. He was a piece of my past. "Why are you here, Jack?" He slowly shook his head, then said, "I came to finish what we started." Before I could respond, he vanished. In the blink of an eye, I felt the air rush toward me, barely turning in time to avoid his punch, which would have shattered my face. But he didn't stop. This wasn't just a fight. It was lightning moving through a human body. "You've gotten stronger." Jack smiled, then said, "And you haven't seen anything yet." The fight between us was like a dance of death. Every move was lethal. Every strike carried years of training, anger, and the will to survive. But I was fighting for something else, something he didn't have. I was fighting for freedom, but he was fighting for something else. "You can't escape, Adam." His words came between rapid breaths as our bodies rushed through the street, shattering glass, crashing into walls. But I knew something he didn't. "I'm not trying to escape, Jack. I'm trying to end all of this." With a single strike, I stopped his attack, and in that moment I saw something in his eyes I didn't expect. Fear. My eyes burned, but not just with anger, but with understanding. Jack wasn't my true enemy. He was just another man lost in this nightmare, just like me. "Why are you fighting me?" His body stiffened for a moment, then he spoke in a low voice. "Because they made me this way." And suddenly, I knew the truth. Jack wasn't just my former friend. He was a victim, just like me. Memories began to flood in, as though a dam had burst inside me. We were there, in the lab. We were just kids. But they made us weapons. Jack didn't hate me. He didn't want to kill me. He was just trying to stay alive. "Jack, we can end this together." But before he could respond, the voice came. "That's enough." We both turned, and there he was again, the chief in the photo, the one who had controlled everything from the beginning, along with others like him, the one behind every lie, every experiment, every death. "Welcome, folks." He stood there perfectly calm, as if not only watching everything unfold, but planning it. His face was familiar, but it had been shrouded in darkness for so long. He wasn't just a scientist or a businessman, he was the master of shadows. "It's time to end the game." I knew I had reached the end. This wasn't the conclusion yet, because I wasn't the same person who started this story anymore. I wasn't Adam Collins who failed in the experiment. I was something different. I was free. But the question was, would I let them decide the ending, or would I write it myself? In the darkness, I stood next to Jack, and on the other side stood the army and the chief, their eyes burning with anger, the air heavy with the scent of death. The moment carried with it both the end and the fate, a decisive battle with no room for retreat. The chief walked with confident steps, his eyes reflecting boundless cruelty. "Didn't you learn from your previous versions? No one escapes from this fate," he said, his voice laced with arrogance, then gestured to his soldiers. The forces moved like a whirlwind, and the battle began. Jack fought by my side, blocking blows, screaming with all his strength, as if the fire in his heart matched the one burning inside me. But the chief was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The chief had pulled his sword and was heading straight to me while I was distracted by the overwhelming number of soldiers. I saw him coming at me with fatal eyes, his eyes burning with pure evil, almost as if flames would burst forth from him. I turned, but it was too late to dodge the sword's path. The sword glimmered, mocking me. But something strange happened. I didn't feel pain. I didn't die. I opened my eyes slowly, had closed them in fear, only to discover why I wasn't dead yet. Jack was standing in front of me. Blood was pumping from him, his gaze filled with pain that words couldn't describe. Jack had put himself in the sword way to protect me, sacrificing his life for mine. The sword was embedded in his chest. I stood frozen, my heart beating like a drum. Jack smiled faintly, his voice was weak. "Finish all this. Don't let them win." Then he collapsed, his body falling to the ground, blood surrounding him. I screamed, a cry that tore through the air. Anger swept over me like a storm. I wasn't me anymore. My body became a machine of rage, destroying everything in its path. I faced the chief with ferocity, fighting like a madman. Every strike was fueled by revenge, but he was strong, absorbing my fury to increase his own power. But I no longer cared. I didn't retreat. The fight went on for minutes that felt like an eternity, until the decisive moment. I let out a scream louder than anything, leaping at the chief, landing a direct blow to his heart. Then I saw fear in his eyes for the first time. He knew the battle was no longer in his side. Breathing heavily, his face smeared with blood, he pulled something strange from his pocket and looked at me, saying, "Don't you really remember any of this? The place, the fight, even Jack?" I didn't understand, but I didn't have time to think. Now. "Everything will return to the beginning. Your current version will die forever." He threw the strange object at me, and instinctively, something inside me ignited. My fury, my revenge, everything exploded into mysterious energy. A bubble of light surrounded me, protecting me in a way I didn't understand. I saw the chief's face full of fear, then his body disappeared into the darkness. Suddenly, the object exploded. But it wasn't an ordinary explosion. It was light, overwhelming light, as if a sun had been born from nothing. The place was filled with white light, almost swallowing me whole. Then it began to fade slowly until everything became clear. That's when I saw what left me in shock, tearing me apart from the inside. My breath stopped, and my heart nearly exploded from the shock. The body I had seen at the beginning was not just any body. My feeling had been right all along. I knew that body too well, the same streets, and the rain that drowned me in memories. It was Jack's body all along. I couldn't believe it. I was the cause of his death, indirectly, but I was still the cause. Does this mean that every time I reach this level, they send me back to the beginning, to here? But this time, I had returned to the beginning with the truth. I remembered everything, every confrontation, every pain, every secret. All of this, thanks to the bubble, and now there was no turning back, no time to waste. This time, I would end it all, for Jack, Mom, for all those who had suffered because of those human monsters, those monsters who loved control and power. I reached into my pocket, where I had hidden the object I had taken from the chief during the fight, his phone. I was sure this phone held the secrets I would need to decide my next move. This war wasn't over yet, but this time it would be the last. I found a safe place, an abandoned apartment in a back alley where cameras and agents couldn't easily. I sat in front of the computer and began to access the phone's data. The data finished loading. I wasn't prepared for what happened next. Only one file appeared on the screen, and its title was simple but terrifying: Human Samples. I clicked on the file, and in that single moment, everything I believed in collapsed.